The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Clarence's house as Charles sat in his private study, reading the latest reports from his staff. The newspapers were spread across his mahogany desk, their headlines screaming about another controversy involving the royal family. He had grown accustomed to the constant scrutiny, but today felt different. There was an urgency in the air that he couldn't quite place. Kate had called earlier, her voice trembling with emotion. She rarely showed vulnerability, especially not to her father-in-law, but something had clearly shaken her to the core. The Princess of Wales had always maintained her composure in public, even during the most challenging times. Her ability to remain graceful under pressure had earned her respect from both the public and the royal family. But this morning, Charles could hear the strain in her voice as she requested a private meeting. The relationship between Charles and Kate had evolved significantly over the years. Initially, there had been some awkwardness, as is common in any family when new members join. Kate came from a middle-class background, vastly different from the aristocratic circles that the royal family was accustomed to. However, her genuine nature and dedication to her royal duties had gradually won over even the most skeptical family members. Charles remembered the early days when Kate first joined the family. She had been nervous, eager to please, and sometimes uncertain about royal protocol. He had watched her transform from a shy young woman into a confident princess who could handle any situation with grace. Her commitment to charitable work, particularly in mental health and early childhood development, had impressed him greatly. She wasn't just fulfilling obligations, she was genuinely passionate about making a difference. The king had come to view Kate as more than just his daughter-in-law. She represented the future of the monarchy, someone who could bridge the gap between tradition and modernity. Her ability to connect with ordinary people while maintaining royal dignity was exactly what the institution needed. In many ways, she reminded him of his late mother, Queen Elizabeth, who had possessed that same natural ability to make people feel at ease. As Charles waited for Kate's arrival, he reflected on the challenges the royal family had faced in recent years. The media scrutiny had become increasingly intense, with every gesture, every word, and every public appearance being analyzed and criticized. The family had learned to adapt, but it wasn't easy. The constant pressure to be perfect, to never show weakness or emotion in public, took its toll on everyone. The morning light grew stronger, illuminating the portraits of previous monarchs that lined the walls of his study. Each face told a story of duty, sacrifice, and service. Charles understood the weight of that legacy better than anyone. He had spent his entire life preparing for the crown, learning the delicate balance between personal desires and public responsibility. Kate's situation was particularly challenging because she had married into this life as an adult. Unlike those born into the royal family, she had to learn the rules and expectations while the entire world watched. The pressure was immense, and Charles had witnessed firsthand how it could affect even the strongest individuals. He had seen the toll it had taken on Diana, and he was determined not to let history repeat itself. The sound of footsteps in the corridor announced Kate's arrival. Charles straightened in his chair, preparing himself for whatever revelation awaited him. He had learned over the years that family crises often came without warning, and the royal family's ability to weather such storms depended largely on how they supported each other behind closed doors. When Kate entered the room, Charles immediately noticed her pallor and the way she held herself, as if trying to maintain composure through sheer willpower. Her usually perfect hair showed signs of being hastily arranged, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested a sleepless night. Despite her obvious distress, she still managed to maintain the poise that had become her trademark. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," Kate began, her voice barely above a whisper. She took the seat across from Charles, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The formality of her words contrasted sharply with the obvious emotion she was struggling to contain. Charles leaned forward slightly, his expression showing genuine concern. He had always prided himself on being approachable with his family, despite the formal protocols that governed their public interactions. "Kate, you know you never need an appointment to speak with me. What's troubling you?" The question seemed to break something inside her. For a moment, her carefully maintained composure wavered, and Charles caught a glimpse of the vulnerable woman beneath the royal facade. She looked toward the window, as if gathering strength from the familiar view of the gardens where she had walked countless times during family gatherings. "It's about what happened yesterday," Kate finally said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "The incident with Camilla. I need you to know what really occurred, because I fear the truth might be misrepresented. Charles felt his stomach tighten. Any mention of conflict between family members immediately raised red flags. The royal family's public image depended on projecting unity and harmony, even when private relationships were strained. Any hint of discord could be explosive in the wrong hands, particularly given the media's appetite for royal drama. "Tell me everything," Charles said simply, settling back in his chair. He had learned long ago that the best way to handle family crises was to listen first and judge later. Too often, misunderstandings escalated because people made assumptions instead of seeking the truth. Kate took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what she was about to reveal. It started at the charity luncheon. You know how these events can be stressful, with all the photographers and the pressure to say the right things. I thought everything was going well until... She paused, struggling with how to continue. Charles waited patiently, understanding that some stories needed time to unfold. He had dealt with enough family crises to know that rushing someone through their account often led to important details being omitted. "Camilla approached me during the reception," Kate continued. "At first, I thought she wanted to discuss the upcoming state dinner. She's always been very involved in the planning of such events, and I respect her experience. But then, she began talking about my children, about how I was raising them." Charles felt his jaw tighten involuntarily. Any criticism of Kate's parenting was particularly sensitive ground. She was a devoted mother who had made numerous sacrifices to ensure her children could have as normal a childhood as possible while still fulfilling their royal duties. The suggestion that her parenting might be inadequate was not only unfair, but potentially devastating. "What specifically did she say?" Charles asked, keeping his voice carefully neutral. He needed to understand the full scope of what had transpired before he could formulate any response. Kate's hands clenched more tightly in her lap. "She said that I was being too protective, that I was sheltering them from their royal responsibilities. She claimed that my approach was making them soft, unprepared for the realities of royal life. But then, she went further. She said that if I couldn't handle the pressure of raising future monarchs, perhaps I should consider stepping back from public duties." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Charles felt his anger building, but he forced himself to remain calm. This was exactly the kind of internal conflict that could destroy the family if not handled properly. The suggestion that Kate should step back from her duties was not only inappropriate, but also incredibly damaging to her position within the family hierarchy. "How did you respond?" Charles asked, though he could see from Kate's expression that the encounter had not ended well. "I tried to remain diplomatic," Kate said, her voice beginning to shake slightly. "I explained that William and I had discussed our approach to parenting extensively, and that we were confident in our decisions. I mentioned that we wanted our children to have a solid foundation before they fully embraced their royal roles." Charles nodded, recognizing the wisdom in Kate and William's approach. The previous generation had learned harsh lessons about throwing young royals into the spotlight too early. The damage that could result from such exposure was well documented, and Charles had no desire to see his grandchildren suffer the same fate. "But she wouldn't accept that," Kate continued, her composure beginning to crack. "She became more aggressive, saying that I was being naive and that my middle-class background was showing. She said that I didn't understand what it meant to be truly royal, and that my influence on William was making him weak." The personal attack on Kate's background was particularly cruel. Charles knew how hard Kate had worked to overcome the class differences that some people still whispered about. She had never tried to hide her origins, but she had also never allowed them to define her contributions to the royal family. To use her background as a weapon was both unfair and counterproductive. Charles could see that Kate was struggling to continue her account. The emotional toll of the encounter was clearly significant, and he could sense that she hadn't yet reached the most difficult part of her story. He waited, offering silent support while she gathered the strength to continue. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece. Outside, the sounds of London continued as normal, oblivious to the crisis unfolding within the walls of Clarence House. Charles found himself thinking about how often such moments occurred in royal life, when the public facade had to be maintained despite private turmoil. Finally, Kate raised her eyes to meet his gaze directly. In them, Charles saw a determination that reminded him why she had been such a valuable addition to the family. Despite her obvious distress, she was not broken. She was angry, hurt, and disappointed, but not defeated. That inner strength was exactly what the monarchy needed in its future leaders. Kate straightened in her chair, drawing strength from somewhere deep within herself. The vulnerability that had marked the beginning of their conversation was being replaced by something harder, more resolute. Charles recognized this transformation, having witnessed it countless times in his own life, when duty demanded strength over personal feelings. What happened next changed everything. Kate continued, her voice now steady and clear. I decided to be completely honest with her. I told Camilla that I understood the pressures of royal life better than she might think, and that my choices as a mother were informed by careful consideration of what was best for my children and the monarchy's future. Charles leaned forward slightly, sensing that they were approaching the heart of the matter. Kate's willingness to stand up to Camilla showed a strength that he had always suspected existed beneath her diplomatic exterior. The royal family needed members who could maintain harmony while also defending their principles when necessary. I explained to her that William and I had spent countless hours discussing how to prepare our children for their roles without overwhelming them, Kate said. We've studied what happened to previous generations, the mistakes that were made, and the lessons that were learned. Our approach isn't about being soft or protective, it's about being strategic. The wisdom in Kate's words was evident to Charles. He had lived through the consequences of rushing young royals into public roles before they were emotionally prepared. The damage could be irreversible, affecting not only the individuals involved, but also the institution they represented. Kate and William's measured approach showed maturity and foresight that should have been commended, not criticized. Camilla's response was immediate and harsh. Kate continued, her fingers unconsciously tightening around the arms of her chair. She accused me of questioning her experience and knowledge of royal life. She said that I was implying she didn't understand what was best for the family, and that my arrogance was showing. Charles felt his protective instincts rising. Kate had never been arrogant. If anything, she had sometimes been too deferential to family members with more experience. Her willingness to listen and learn had been one of her greatest strengths during her early years as a royal. To twist that quality into something negative was not only unfair, but also destructive to family unity. The situation escalated quickly from there, Kate said, her voice dropping slightly as she recalled the painful details. Other guests at the luncheon began to notice that something was wrong. I could see people trying to listen without appearing obvious about it. The last thing I wanted was to create a public scene, so I suggested we continue our conversation privately. Charles nodded approvingly. Kate's instinct to protect the family's public image, even while being attacked, demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment that made her valuable to the monarchy. The ability to prioritize the institution's welfare over personal grievances was a rare quality that couldn't be taught. We moved to a smaller reception room, where we thought we could speak more freely, Kate continued. But, instead of calming down, Camilla became more aggressive. She started talking about how I had changed William, how he used to be more decisive before he married me. She said I was making him weak and indecisive, that his mother would be disappointed in what he had become. The mention of Diana was like a physical blow. Charles saw Kate flinch as she repeated the words, and he felt his own anger surge. Using Diana's memory as a weapon was particularly cruel, especially since Diana had always advocated for a more modern, compassionate approach to royal duties. The suggestion that she would disapprove of William's thoughtful leadership style was both inaccurate and deeply hurtful. That's when I realized this wasn't really about parenting or royal duties, Kate said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. This was about power and control. Camilla felt threatened by the influence William and I have been gaining within the family structure. She saw our approach as a challenge to the established way of doing things. Charles recognized the accuracy of Kate's assessment. The royal family, like any complex organization, had its own internal dynamics and power struggles. Camilla's position as queen consort was secure, but she might have felt that younger family members were eclipsing her influence. Such fears, while understandable, should never have been expressed through personal attacks on family members. I tried to de-escalate the situation, Kate continued. I assured her that we weren't trying to challenge anyone's authority or experience. I explained that we simply wanted to find our own path while respecting the traditions and wisdom of previous generations. But she wasn't interested in compromise. The diplomatic skills that Kate had developed over years of royal duties were evident in her approach. Even when under attack, she had attempted to find common ground and maintain family harmony. Her failure to achieve this outcome wasn't due to any lack of effort on her part, but rather to Camilla's unwillingness to engage constructively. She then made it personal in a way that I never expected, Kate said, her voice beginning to tremble slightly. She started attacking my family, saying that my parents had raised me to be manipulative and calculating. She said that I had trapped William into marriage and that I was using my children as tools to secure my position in the family. Charles felt his composure slip for the first time during their conversation. The attack on Kate's family and her motivations crossed every line of decency and fairness. Kate had proven her dedication to the royal family through years of faithful service and genuine commitment to her duties. To suggest that her love for William was calculated or that she was using her children for personal gain was not only false, but deeply offensive. The accusations were so outrageous that I was momentarily speechless, Kate admitted. I've faced criticism before, both from the media and from within the family, but nothing like this. It felt like she was trying to destroy everything I had built over the years, to reduce my entire relationship with this family to some kind of scheming conspiracy. Charles could see the pain that these accusations had caused. Kate had worked tirelessly to prove herself worthy of her position, never asking for special treatment or exemptions from royal duties. Her integration into the family had been one of the monarchy's greatest success stories in recent years, and to have that achievement dismissed so cruelly was unconscionable. I finally found my voice and told her that her accusations were completely false and unfair, Kate said, sitting straighter in her chair. I reminded her that I had never sought this life for personal gain, that I had given up my privacy, my freedom, and my previous life plans to serve the monarchy. I told her that questioning my motives or my love for William was not only hurtful, but also destructive to family unity. Charles felt proud of Kate's response. She had defended herself with dignity while still acknowledging the importance of family relationships. Her willingness to stand up for herself showed strength, while her continued reference to family unity demonstrated her commitment to the greater good. But instead of backing down or apologizing, she became even more aggressive, Kate continued, her voice now carrying a note of disbelief. She started shouting, saying that I was naive if I thought I could lecture her about family loyalty. She said that I would never truly understand what it meant to be royal, and that my presence in the family was a constant reminder of how standards had been lowered. The class-based attack was particularly painful because it struck at Kate's deepest insecurities. Despite years of successful royal service, she had always been conscious of her non-aristocratic background and had worked extra hard to prove herself worthy of her position. To have that vulnerability exploited so ruthlessly showed a level of cruelty that Charles found difficult to comprehend. At that point, I realized that rational discussion was impossible, Kate said. She was too angry, too committed to her position to listen to anything I might say. I tried to end the conversation politely, saying that we should perhaps discuss this at another time when emotions weren't so high. Charles appreciated Kate's continued attempts to maintain dignity even in the face of such provocation. Her instinct to preserve relationships and find peaceful solutions was exactly the kind of leadership quality the royal family needed. The fact that these efforts were unsuccessful reflected poorly on Camilla, not on Kate. That's when she made the threat that really frightened me, Kate said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. She said that if I couldn't accept my place in the family hierarchy, she would make sure that my role was reconsidered. She said she had more influence than I realized, and that she could make my life very difficult if she chose to. The threat was shocking in its directness and its implications. Charles felt a cold anger building as he contemplated what such a threat might mean for Kate and her children. The suggestion that Camilla might use her position to undermine Kate's role in the family was not only inappropriate, but potentially devastating to the monarchy's future stability. Charles felt the weight of Kate's revelation settle over him like a heavy blanket. The threat that Camilla had made wasn't just inappropriate. It was potentially destructive to everything he had worked to build since becoming king. The monarchy's strength lay in its unity, and any attempts to undermine that unity from within could have catastrophic consequences. Kate, Charles said carefully, I need you to tell me exactly what happened after that threat was made. Every detail is important now. Kate nodded, seeming to draw strength from his obvious concern and support. I was shocked by the directness of her threat. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I had heard. But then, I realized that she was completely serious. The look in her eyes was cold, calculating. It wasn't the heat of anger anymore. It was something much more deliberate. Charles recognized the description. He had seen that look in Camilla's eyes before, usually when she was dealing with perceived threats to her position or influence. It was a side of her that few people witnessed, but it was real and potentially dangerous when directed at family members. I told her that I hoped she would reconsider making such threats, Kate continued, and that I believed we could work through our differences without resorting to intimidation. I reminded her that we were family and that family members should support each other, not tear each other down. The maturity and dignity in Kate's response impressed Charles greatly. Even when faced with a direct threat to her position, she had attempted to appeal to family loyalty and find common ground. Her approach showed exactly the kind of leadership quality that would serve the monarchy well in future years. But she laughed, Kate said, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. She actually laughed at what I said. She told me that I was being naive again, that this wasn't about family, it was about power and position. She said that I had been playing a game without realizing it, and that she was simply making the rules clear. Charles felt his anger building at the callousness of Camilla's response. The royal family had faced enough external challenges over the years without having to deal with internal power struggles. The idea that family members might be working against each other instead of supporting the common good was deeply troubling. That's when I made my decision, Kate said, her voice growing stronger. I told her that I wouldn't be intimidated or bullied into changing my approach to my family or my royal duties. I said that I had earned my place in this family through years of faithful service, and that I wouldn't allow anyone to make me feel otherwise. Charles felt a surge of pride at Kate's strength. This was exactly the kind of backbone that the royal family needed in its future leaders. The ability to stand up to bullying while maintaining dignity was a rare quality that couldn't be taught. It came from within. How did she react to that? Charles asked, though he suspected the answer wouldn't be pleasant. Kate took a deep breath before continuing. She became furious. I mean, truly angry in a way that I had never seen before. She started screaming at me, saying that I was ungrateful and insubordinate. She said that I had forgotten my place and that she would remind me of it. Charles winced at the description. Public displays of anger were always problematic for royal family members, but this went far beyond inappropriate behavior. The idea that Camilla might have lost control so completely was both shocking and deeply concerning. The screaming was loud enough that people outside the room could hear it. Kate continued. I could see staff members looking uncomfortable, and I knew that some of the other luncheon guests were beginning to gather near the door. The situation was becoming a public spectacle, which was exactly what I had been trying to avoid. The public nature of the incident made it exponentially worse. Royal family disputes were always problematic, but when they became visible to staff and guests, they could quickly spiral into major scandals. The media would inevitably learn about such incidents, and the damage to the monarchy's reputation could be severe. I tried to calm her down, Kate said. I spoke quietly, hoping she would lower her voice, and we could end the confrontation with some dignity intact. I suggested that we should continue our discussion privately at a later time when we were both more composed. Charles appreciated Kate's continued attempts to manage the situation diplomatically. Even when being screamed at and threatened, she had maintained her focus on protecting the family's reputation and finding a peaceful resolution. Such self-control under pressure was remarkable. But she was beyond reason at that point, Kate continued, her voice trembling slightly at the memory. She started making accusations about my relationship with William, claiming that I manipulated him and controlled him. She said that the man she knew before our marriage was gone, replaced by someone weak and indecisive. The personal attacks on Kate's marriage were particularly cruel because they struck at the foundation of her happiness and security. Charles knew that Kate and William had one of the strongest relationships in the royal family, built on genuine love and mutual respect. To suggest that it was based on manipulation was both false and deeply hurtful. Then, she started attacking my parenting again, Kate said, her composure beginning to crack. She said that I was raising my children to be soft and unprepared for royal life. She claimed that they would never be strong enough to handle the pressures of monarchy because I was protecting them too much. Charles felt his protective instincts flare at the mention of his grandchildren. Kate and William were excellent parents who had thoughtfully considered how to prepare their children for royal life, while still allowing them to have as normal a childhood as possible. The suggestion that their approach was damaging was both unfair and potentially harmful if it influenced how the children were treated within the family. I finally lost my composure, Kate admitted, her voice dropping. Not completely, but enough that I spoke more sharply than I had intended. I told her that she had no right to attack my children or my parenting, and that her behavior was unbecoming of her position. Charles didn't blame Kate for defending her children. Any parent would have reacted similarly when their parenting was being attacked so viciously. The fact that she had maintained her composure as long as she had showed remarkable restraint. That's when she completely lost control, Kate said, her voice barely above a whisper. She started screaming even louder, saying things that I won't repeat. Personal attacks on my family, my background, my character. She was completely out of control, and I realized that there was nothing I could do to stop her. Charles felt sick at the description. Such a complete loss of control was not only inappropriate for any family member, but particularly problematic for someone in Camilla's position. The queen consort was expected to be a model of dignity and self-control, and this behavior fell far short of those expectations. The worst part was that she seemed to be enjoying it, Kate continued, her voice carrying a note of horror. Once she started screaming, it was like she couldn't stop, or didn't want to stop. She kept going, attacking everything about me and my family, and there was something almost gleeful about her expression. Charles felt a chill at Kate's description. The idea that Camilla might have been taking pleasure in causing pain was deeply disturbing. Such behavior suggested problems that went far beyond simple family disagreements or power struggles. Finally, some of the staff intervened, Kate said. They came into the room, claiming that there was an urgent phone call for Camilla. It was clearly a pretext to end the confrontation, but I was grateful for their quick thinking. The situation had become completely unmanageable. Charles made a mental note to thank the staff members who had intervened. Their quick thinking had prevented an already bad situation from becoming even worse. The fact that they felt compelled to intervene also spoke to the severity of the incident. Even then, she didn't stop immediately, Kate continued. She kept shouting as the staff tried to escort her from the room. She was screaming that this wasn't over, that she would make sure I understood my place in the family hierarchy. The continued threats, even in front of staff members, showed how completely Camilla had lost control. Such behavior would inevitably become known throughout the household and could quickly spread beyond the family circle. The potential for scandal was enormous. By the time she finally left the room, I was shaking, Kate admitted. Not just from anger, but from shock. I had never experienced anything like that before, and I wasn't sure how to process what had just happened. Charles could well imagine Kate's shock. Such behavior was completely outside the normal range of family disagreements, and experiencing it firsthand would have been deeply traumatic. The fact that it came from someone in Camilla's position made it even more shocking. The other guests at the luncheon were obviously uncomfortable, Kate continued. Some of them had clearly heard at least part of the confrontation, and they didn't know how to react. I had to spend the rest of the event pretending that nothing had happened, smiling, and making small talk while my hands were still shaking. Charles felt deep sympathy for Kate's position. Having to maintain a public facade immediately after such a traumatic experience would have required enormous strength and self-control. The fact that she had managed it spoke to her professionalism and commitment to her royal duties. That night, I couldn't sleep, Kate said quietly. I kept replaying the confrontation in my mind, trying to understand what had triggered such an extreme reaction. I wondered if I had said something wrong, if I had somehow provoked her without realizing it. Charles recognized the self-doubt that often followed such traumatic experiences. Victims of verbal abuse frequently questioned their own actions, wondering if they had somehow deserved the treatment they received. In this case, Charles was certain that Kate had done nothing to warrant such an attack. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't really about anything I had done, Kate continued, her voice growing stronger. This was about Camilla's own insecurities and fears. She saw our success and popularity as a threat to her position, and she lashed out in the cruelest way she could think of. Kate's analysis showed remarkable insight and emotional intelligence. The ability to step back from such a personal attack and understand its underlying causes demonstrated maturity and wisdom beyond her years. It also showed that she wouldn't be permanently damaged by the experience. Charles sat in contemplative silence for several minutes after Kate finished her account. The gravity of what she had described was beginning to fully sink in, and he found himself grappling with emotions he hadn't expected to feel. As king, he was accustomed to dealing with complex family dynamics, but this situation was particularly challenging because it struck at the heart of what he valued most about the modern monarchy. Kate, he said finally, his voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. I want you to know that I believe every word you've told me. More importantly, I want you to understand that Camilla's behavior was completely unacceptable, regardless of whatever personal issues she might be dealing with. Kate's eyes filled with tears of relief at his words. She had clearly been afraid that he might not believe her account or might try to minimize what had happened. Charles's immediate and unequivocal support seemed to lift a tremendous burden from her shoulders. "I was so afraid you might think I was exaggerating or being overly sensitive," Kate said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I know how close you and Camilla are, and I didn't want to create problems in your relationship. But I also couldn't just pretend this never happened." Charles leaned forward, his expression intense and focused. "Kate, you must never apologize for telling the truth about something like this. The fact that you were concerned about my relationship with Camilla while dealing with your own trauma shows exactly the kind of character that makes you such a valuable member of this family." The king paused, collecting his thoughts before continuing. "What Camilla did was not only wrong, it was dangerous. Not just to you personally, but to everything we're trying to build as a modern monarchy. We cannot allow internal power struggles to undermine the unity and dignity that the institution requires." Kate nodded, seeming to draw strength from his unwavering support. "I've been wondering what to do about it. I don't want to escalate the situation, but I also can't just ignore what happened. Especially since she made it clear that she considers this an ongoing conflict." Charles stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the gardens while he considered his response. The situation required careful handling, as any public revelation of the conflict could be devastating to the monarchy's reputation. At the same time, he couldn't allow such behavior to continue unchecked. "The first thing you need to understand," Charles said, turning back to face Kate, "is that you will have my complete support in this matter. Whatever Camilla may think about her influence or power within the family, she is mistaken if she believes she can intimidate or threaten other family members without consequences." Kate's posture straightened at his words, and Charles could see some of her natural confidence beginning to return. The knowledge that she wouldn't have to face this challenge alone was clearly providing her with the strength she needed. "What kind of consequences are you considering?" Kate asked carefully. She was clearly hoping for justice, but also aware that any action taken against Camilla could have far-reaching implications for the entire family. Charles returned to his chair, his expression thoughtful but determined. "That depends on several factors. First, we need to understand whether this was an isolated incident or part of a pattern of behavior. Second, we need to assess the risk of this becoming public knowledge. And third, we need to determine what actions are necessary to prevent any recurrence." Kate nodded, appreciating his systematic approach to the problem. "I don't think this was completely isolated. There have been smaller incidents over the years, comments about my background, subtle undermining of my decisions, attempts to exclude me from certain discussions. But nothing like yesterday's confrontation." Charles felt his anger reignite at the revelation that Kate had been dealing with a pattern of harassment. The idea that she had been suffering these attacks in silence while continuing to fulfill her royal duties with grace and professionalism made him admire her even more. "Why didn't you tell me about these earlier incidents?" Charles asked gently. He wasn't criticizing her decision, but he needed to understand the full scope of the problem. Kate looked down at her hands, clearly struggling with the answer. "I thought I could handle it. The comments were usually subtle enough that I could dismiss them as misunderstandings or personality differences. I didn't want to be seen as someone who couldn't cope with family dynamics or who ran to you with every minor problem." Charles recognized the impossible position Kate had been placed in. Royal family members were expected to maintain harmony and handle conflicts diplomatically, but they also needed support when facing serious harassment. The pressure to appear strong and capable could prevent them from seeking help when they truly needed it. "Kate, you must promise me that you will never again feel that you have to handle such treatment alone," Charles said firmly. "The monarchy depends on family members supporting each other, and I cannot protect this family if I don't know when protection is needed." Kate nodded, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "I promise. I realize now that my silence might have enabled Camilla's behavior to escalate. If I had spoken up earlier, yesterday's confrontation might never have happened." Charles reached across the space between them and gently took Kate's hand. "You are not responsible for Camilla's choices or actions. She is an adult who must be held accountable for her own behavior. Your only responsibility was to serve this family with dignity and honor, which you have done admirably." The physical gesture of support seemed to break down the last of Kate's emotional barriers. She began crying freely, releasing the stress and fear that she had been carrying since the confrontation. Charles waited patiently, understanding that she needed this emotional release before they could move forward. "I keep thinking about my children," Kate said through her tears. What if Camilla decides to target them? What if her animosity toward me affects how she treats them? They're so young and innocent, and they don't deserve to be caught up in adult conflicts. Charles felt a surge of protective fury at the thought of his grandchildren being targeted. Kate, I give you my word that Camilla will never be allowed to harm or mistreat your children in any way. If she cannot control her behavior around you, she certainly will not be given opportunities to take out her frustrations on innocent children. The absolute certainty in his voice seemed to provide Kate with significant comfort. She wiped her tears and managed a small smile. Thank you. Knowing that you'll protect them means everything to me. Charles stood again, beginning to pace as his mind worked through the various implications and necessary actions. Now we need to discuss how to handle this situation moving forward. There are several things that must happen immediately. Kate straightened in her chair, clearly ready to hear his plan. Her earlier vulnerability was being replaced by the focused determination that had made her such an effective royal family member. First, Charles said, I will be having a very serious conversation with Camilla about her behavior. She needs to understand that what happened yesterday was completely unacceptable and cannot be repeated under any circumstances. Kate nodded, though Charles could see some apprehension in her expression. What if she denies what happened or tries to minimize it? Charles's expression hardened. Then, she will discover that I have no tolerance for dishonesty in addition to having no tolerance for bullying. The staff members who intervened yesterday can confirm the basic facts of what occurred, even if they didn't hear every word. The mention of witnesses seemed to provide Kate with additional comfort. She had clearly been worried that it would be her word against Camilla's, which could have created an impossible situation for Charles to navigate. Second, Charles continued, there will be immediate changes to ensure that you are never placed in a vulnerable position with Camilla again. All future interactions between you will take place in supervised settings with other family members or senior staff present. Kate looked both relieved and slightly sad at this decision. I had hoped we might be able to work through our differences and develop a better relationship. But I suppose that's not possible now. Charles appreciated Kate's continued willingness to hope for family harmony, even after everything she had endured. Perhaps in time, with proper safeguards and clear consequences for inappropriate behavior, some kind of working relationship might be possible. But your safety and dignity must be the priority right now. Kate nodded her understanding, clearly accepting that her previous hopes for a close relationship with Camilla were no longer realistic. What about public appearances? We're supposed to attend several events together in the coming weeks. Charles had already been considering this complication. Those appearances will continue as scheduled, but with modifications to ensure your protection. You will never be left alone with Camilla, and there will be clear protocols for handling any inappropriate behavior should it occur in public. The practical nature of these arrangements seemed to provide Kate with a sense of security. She was clearly someone who felt better when she understood exactly what to expect and how potential problems would be handled. Third, Charles continued, we need to prepare for the possibility that this situation might become public knowledge. While I hope it won't, we must be ready to protect both you and the institution if news of the conflict leaks out. Kate's expression grew troubled at this prospect. What would happen if it became public? Would it damage the monarchy's reputation? Charles considered his answer carefully. Any internal conflict has the potential to cause damage, but the greater damage would come from allowing inappropriate behavior to continue unchecked. The public expects us to maintain high standards of conduct, and they would be more understanding of decisive action taken to uphold those standards than they would be of inaction in the face of clear wrongdoing. Kate seemed to find some comfort in his analysis. She had clearly been worried that her decision to speak up might harm the institution she had worked so hard to serve faithfully. The afternoon sun had shifted significantly by the time Charles and Kate concluded their immediate planning session. As they prepared to part ways, Charles could see that Kate had regained much of her natural composure and strength. The knowledge that she would not have to face this challenge alone had clearly transformed her from a victim into a survivor ready to move forward. Before you go, Charles said, I want you to know how proud I am of the way you've handled this entire situation. From your attempts to resolve the conflict diplomatically to your decision to come to me when it became clear that wasn't possible, you've shown exactly the kind of judgment and character that this family needs. Kate's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude rather than pain and fear. Thank you for believing me and for taking action. I was so afraid that I might have to choose between protecting myself and protecting the family's reputation. Charles shook his head firmly. You should never have to make such a choice. This family's strength comes from supporting each other, not from sacrificing individual members to maintain an illusion of harmony. What Camilla did was wrong, and addressing it is not a betrayal of family loyalty. It's an affirmation of our values. As Kate prepared to leave, Charles felt a renewed sense of purpose about his role as both king and family patriarch. The monarchy's future depended not just on maintaining traditions, but on evolving those traditions to protect and support the people who serve the institution with dedication and honor. Over the following days, Charles found himself reflecting deeply on the larger implications of what Kate had revealed. The incident with Camilla wasn't just a family dispute. It represented a fundamental conflict between different visions of what the modern monarchy should be. Kate and William represented a more open, compassionate approach that connected with contemporary values, while Camilla seemed to cling to older, more hierarchical models of royal behavior. The conversation with Camilla, when it finally occurred, was unlike anything Charles had experienced in their long relationship. He had prepared himself for denial, deflection, or attempts to minimize what had happened. What he encountered instead was a defensive anger that seemed to confirm every detail of Kate's account. She came to you with lies and exaggerations, Camilla said when Charles confronted her with Kate's version of events. She's trying to drive a wedge between us, to undermine my position in this family. Can't you see what she's doing? Charles had expected such accusations, but hearing them spoken aloud still shocked him. Camilla, I've known Kate for many years now. She has never shown any inclination toward manipulation or dishonesty. The idea that she would fabricate such serious allegations is simply not credible. Camilla's response revealed the depth of her animosity toward Kate. You don't know her the way I do. She's been playing a long game, gradually turning family members against me while positioning herself as the innocent victim. Yesterday was just the first time she showed her true colors. The projection in Camilla's accusations was striking. She was describing exactly the kind of manipulative behavior that Kate had accused her of, but attributing it to Kate instead. Charles recognized this as a common defensive mechanism, but it didn't make the conversation any less disturbing. Even if I were to accept your interpretation of Kate's motivations, Charles said carefully, that still wouldn't justify the way you spoke to her yesterday. Multiple staff members heard you screaming. That behavior was unacceptable regardless of any personal grievances you might have. Camilla's demeanor shifted noticeably at the mention of witnesses. The staff members don't understand the full context of what happened. They only heard part of the conversation, and they certainly couldn't understand the underlying dynamics at play. Charles noted that she wasn't denying the screaming, only trying to justify it. Camilla, there is no context that could justify the kind of behavior that was described to me. You threatened another family member, attacked her character and her parenting, and made accusations about her motivations that were both cruel and unfounded. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, with Charles patiently addressing each of Camilla's attempts to deflect blame or minimize her actions. Throughout the discussion, she never once expressed regret for the pain she had caused Kate, nor did she show any recognition that her behavior had been inappropriate. What emerged from the conversation was a picture of someone who felt deeply threatened by the younger generation of royals and their growing influence within the family structure. Camilla had apparently interpreted every success that Kate and William achieved as a diminishment of her own position and importance. You used to value my experience and judgment, Camilla said near the end of their conversation. Now you seem more interested in protecting her feelings than in maintaining proper family hierarchy and discipline. Charles realized that this statement revealed the core of the problem. Camilla saw the royal family as a rigid hierarchy where newer members should defer to established ones, while Charles believed in a more collaborative approach that valued individual contributions regardless of seniority. The monarchy's survival depends on our ability to evolve and adapt, Charles explained. Kate and William represent the future of this institution, and their approach to royal duties has been remarkably successful. Supporting their work isn't about choosing sides. It's about recognizing what's best for the monarchy's long-term health. Camilla's reaction to this explanation was telling. Instead of engaging with the substance of what Charles was saying, she focused on what she perceived as a threat to her status. So you're saying that my experience and knowledge are less valuable than their modern ideas? Charles struggled to find a way to reassure Camilla about her importance while still making clear that her behavior toward Kate was unacceptable. Your experience is valuable, but it cannot be used as a justification for treating other family members with disrespect. Everyone in this family deserves to be treated with basic dignity and courtesy. The conversation ended without the apology or commitment to change behavior that Charles had hoped for. Instead, Camilla seemed more entrenched in her position than ever, convinced that she was the victim of a conspiracy rather than the perpetrator of inappropriate behavior. In the weeks that followed, Charles implemented the protective measures he had promised Kate. All interactions between the two women were carefully supervised, and Charles made it clear to senior staff that any inappropriate behavior should be reported immediately. The changes were subtle enough to avoid public attention, but effective enough to ensure Kate's safety and peace of mind. The most difficult aspect of the situation was watching the impact on family dynamics. The easy camaraderie that had once characterized family gatherings was replaced by a careful formality that everyone could sense, but no one could openly acknowledge. Charles found himself constantly monitoring interactions, ready to intervene if tensions began to escalate. William's reaction when Kate finally told him what had happened was explosive in its quiet intensity. Charles had rarely seen his son so angry, but William's fury was completely controlled and focused on protecting his family while maintaining institutional stability. "How long has this been going on?" William asked when he met with Charles to discuss the situation. "How long has Kate been dealing with this kind of treatment without my knowledge?" Charles explained what he understood about the pattern of smaller incidents that had preceded the major confrontation. William's guilt at not recognizing what Kate had been enduring was painful to witness, but Charles reminded him that Kate had been deliberately concealing the harassment to protect family harmony. "She was trying to protect all of us," Charles said. Kate understood that family conflicts could damage the monarchy's reputation, so she absorbed the abuse rather than risk creating a public scandal. That kind of self-sacrifice is admirable, but it's also why we must ensure it never happens again. William's commitment to protecting Kate and their children was absolute, but he also recognized the delicate balance required to address the situation without causing greater damage to the institution they all served. The resolution, when it finally came, was not the dramatic confrontation or public revelation that many might have expected. Instead, it was a quiet but decisive shift in family dynamics that left no doubt about Charles's priorities and values. Camilla's role in public events remained unchanged, but her influence within the family structure was significantly diminished. She was no longer included in strategic planning discussions, and her input on family matters was no longer sought or valued. The change was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who understood the nuances of royal protocol. Most importantly, Kate's position within the family was not only protected but actually strengthened by the events. Charles's unwavering support sent a clear message about the kind of behavior that would and would not be tolerated within the royal family. Other family members took note, and Kate found herself treated with a new level of respect and deference. The incident also brought Charles and Kate closer together in a way that transcended their formal relationship as king and daughter-in-law. They had faced a crisis together and emerged with mutual respect and trust that would serve them well in the years ahead. As Charles reflected on the entire episode months later, he realized that it had been a defining moment for his reign. By choosing to protect Kate rather than maintain a false peace with Camilla, he had established important precedents about how his monarchy would operate. Merit and character would matter more than seniority or traditional hierarchy. Family members would be expected to treat each other with respect regardless of their personal feelings or ambitions. The monarchy emerged from the crisis stronger and more unified than before, but it was a unity based on shared values rather than enforced silence. Charles had learned that true family harmony could only be built on a foundation of justice and mutual respect, not on the suppression of legitimate grievances. Kate's courage in speaking up had not only protected herself and her children, but had also helped to create a healthier environment for all family members. Her willingness to risk personal relationships for the sake of principle had demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership that the monarchy needed for its future success. The silence that Camilla's screams had failed to shatter was not the silence of intimidation or fear, but the silence of dignity and strength. It was the silence of a family that had chosen principle over convenience, justice over false harmony, and truth over comfortable lies. And in that silence, the future of the monarchy found its strongest foundation.